Okay, if we have a look in the help file for sfplay, which is of course where I learnt about all the different kinds of messages which it responds to and how to use preloads and how to do all that kind of thing. If we look in the new features here, we find that with the latest version of Max MSP, they've got a new feature which means you control the speed at which an audio file plays back, which might be quite a useful thing. It uses this syntax here which says speed $1, and that's a little bit obscure to understand, but it's useful to know, so I'm just going to explain a little bit how that works. First of all, that's a message, so I put that in a message box, speed, and then I put a $sign immediately followed by the number 1, speed $1. And I'm going to put into that, just so we can see what it does, a number box, and I'm going to send that to our old favourite, the print object, which, as you remember, will send it to the Max window so we can see what this thing is actually doing. Once I lock the patcher, you can maybe see how that works. In other words, each time I send a new number, I get a new message. I get a message speed 5, or I get a message speed 4, or speed 3. So in other words, whatever $1 says, that is whatever number is coming in there. And that could be anything at all, and it allows me to make messages which I can then control, in this case with a number box. So that's what we're going to use to control the speed. In this case here, I want speeds between, well, I want to go slightly slower. So I'm going to want floating point numbers. And the speeds there, instead of putting them in there, I'm going to send the speed message here into sfplay. Let's just have a little play with that right now. And mistake. So that's all of them playing back about 10% of the speed they were, 30% speed, 40% speed, and as we go up to 1, we get original speed, and we could probably go faster. Okay. So what I'd like to be able to do is, for most of the time when those slices play back, when those individual files play back, I'd like them to play back at speed 1, at normal speed, but occasionally I'd like it to pick a lower number. Now, in order to do that, I need a kind of a weighted random number that most of the time picks 1 and sometimes picks something else. I'm going to use an object which is not built into Max. It's an external called alia, which is part of the Peter L. Sears Lobjects. And I'm going to use an old programming trick. What alia does is it chooses from a list of numbers. So what I'm going to give it here is a list of numbers with lots of 1s and 1 or 2 slightly lower numbers. So let's just see what the effect of that is. So I give alia that list to go with. Let's have a little bang here so we can see how that's working. And let's have that there so we can see what this is producing. What that now does is, once I load up that list, is you can see most of the time it picks 1. And every once in a while it picks the 4. So in other words, it'll pick 4 1s for every time it picks a half or it picks a 4. So what I can now do is I can now use that, can be driven again from my metronome here. Boom. Oops, made a mistake here. I'm just going to do that again. Back with you in a minute. Send this here, the output of this floating number box, into my speed message. So then what I will then have is that each time we get a bang from the metronome here, we'll get a new speed, which most of the time will be 1, but occasionally will be slower, which means that that should work pretty much like this. So what you can see there is occasionally we get a 0.5 or a 0.4 in the speed, and one of the little audio files plays back a little bit slower. Okay, that's pretty much what I had in the original object, which I will just talk a little bit about if I can find it, which is this orbitplayer here. It's very similar. There's the sfplay object. This thing here is a little sort of preset thing which I've made. It's called, I can't remember what they call these things. But basically it's a way of saving little bits of Max MSP that you use frequently. And in this case it's a rather slightly over elaborate way of having a pan control and a volume control all as a preset. Up here, instead of the metronome, I've used an object called tempo, which allows me to switch between quartets and quavers. Let me just do that. Just a slightly more sophisticated way of doing that. I've got 4 different versions of this coming through, which I'm using a switch object with. So when I hit 1, I'm just getting it counting up from 1 to 8. 5, 6, 7, 8. When I hit 2, I've got a drunken walk, which doesn't always sound that interesting. So that tends to play neighbouring files, one after the other. When I hit 3, it's getting filtered through the random one. And when I hit 4, it's going through another one of Peter Elsier's lobjects, which is has a tendency to repeat numbers if I turn it up. I'll show you what I mean. In other words, the nearer to 1 that goes, the more likely it is to repeat the same object than get stuck on the same object. And all of this here has got this clever little alia thing here, so if you watch to speed, once again you'll see every once in a while we get a slice playback slower. And the only other thing to mention is these loadbang objects. What a loadbang object is, when I open up this orbitplayer, for instance, if alia hasn't been sent this message, then it won't know what numbers to choose from. If the sfplay hasn't been sent these messages here, then it won't know which audio files to play. So what you tend to do is you tend to put loadbang messages in. In this case, the loadbang is telling it to load all the files, and it's telling us what to set that to and to have that there, and the loadbang here is loading up these numbers. And again, that means that when I open this patch and press play, I'm confident the thing will just play without me having to remember what things I had set months and months ago when I wrote the patch. And that's the end of that. sfplay is not perhaps actually the most interesting object to be using in Max MSP for doing audio. If you think about it, for what I'm doing here, it would make a lot more sense to use a sampler, a sampling plugin in a synthesizer. What we'll come on to talk about is using buffer objects, which are in many ways much more exciting for playing with audio. Thank you very much.